Could this machine cure deafness? Was it a spy tool, or could it communicate with aliens? We're going to find all that out today on Archive Hour. All right, everybody, welcome. Happy Friday. Welcome to Archive Hour. I'm Greg Malazzi. Today we got some real archives. We're not going to be reading off the laptop today, so that is good news. That is fun news. How are you doing? As usual, we got our coffee, and you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to turn down the mic when I take a sip, because my last episode, 2 people said they did not like the sound of me taking a sip of coffee. But what are you going to do? I'm not going to not drink coffee. So here you go. I'm going to make you 2 people happy. There we go. You did not have to hear me take a sip of coffee. As usual, please subscribe here on our YouTube channel. Please subscribe to our Substack. That is cosmicclock.net. On that link, you will find both our YouTube channel. Of course, you can find it here since you're watching on YouTube, and our Substack. And if you sign up for our Substack, we appreciate that a lot. If you become a paid subscriber, we appreciate that a lot as well. We've been growing every week. It's really fun to see. Paid subscribers get access to all sorts of cool, rare stuff that you cannot find anywhere else on the planet Earth. So please subscribe. We appreciate that. Today is an interesting day, and that is because we're going to continue from an episode. Well, actually, this wasn't an Archive Hour episode. This was a video I put up several weeks ago about the TD100. You can see that video on our channel. That was some footage we shot years ago. Here's the TD100. I'll explain it a bit more in a minute. That video, which you can see on our channel, we visited the researcher Adam Curry, who's a great guy, and we brought Andrija Puharich's TD100 machine to him to see if we could sort of get it working and back engineer it. And you can see what resulted in the video. But this is a continuation of that, because what we have here today are some very rare archives talking about the TD100, what it did, etc. For those who don't know and haven't watched that first video, the TD100, which stands for Transdermal 100, was a device that Andrija Puharich invented in the early 1960s. This was a big box-type device. And there were headphones. They're not really headphones in the sense you'd put them on your ears, but they were headphone-looking, and it had 2 metal plates that would go on the person's cheek or their neck. And the idea of the original invention of the TD100 was that he tested it on people who were nerve deaf, so basically deaf individuals who could not hear, could not register language, could not hear at all. And the TD100 emitted a certain signal or frequency that would sort of bypass the way we normally hear, and the frequency would go directly into the nerves, the facial nerves, and through that and through bone conduction, etc., the signal, which contained a voice or a tone, would go directly to the person's head, and they would be able to hear what would be emitted from the TD100 machine. I want to say, as I normally do in these episodes that get into sort of scientific stuff, I'm no scientist, I'm no physicist, I am simply a filmmaker, a storyteller. So if I'm not explaining a lot of this stuff well, I apologize. I, in fact, just had a really interesting conversation with somebody who I won't really publicly say until I speak with him and he's willing to go public, but somebody who's very interested in all this TD100 stuff and who is much more knowledgeable about it, how it works, the circuitry, the signals, etc. So maybe I will do something with him. We'll do an episode and we'll talk about it. That would be really cool because he was fascinating to talk to about this. He knew so much. It opened my eyes to learning more about this. But essentially, the best way I, as a layman, can describe it is I'm going to put a picture up on the screen. This one's a little blurry, but it was a device that enabled deaf people to hear tones and words and speaking directly into their heads and bypassing the ear. So this was groundbreaking at the time. In 1961, there was even a New York Times article breaking this news of the invention, which you'll see on the screen here. And it was really what was being considered a medical miracle at the time. And mysteriously, after that early 1961 period when this was all first discovered, invented, and the information was put out, people noticed that it sort of disappeared. No one talked about this thing again. It kind of went into obscurity, or went black, one might say. And this is true because of the research I've done. You would think for such a miraculous invention in the medical world that this would be everywhere. People would be excited. This could cure deafness and so forth. But just like that, it seemed to just kind of go dark. Puharich never really spoke about it. And there's reasons why that happened. And in this episode, we are going to talk about those reasons. So I hope that gave a decent background into what the TD100 is. Again, watch the video we did with Adam Curry from a couple weeks ago on our channel here, and that gives a really good idea of what it's all about. So I think the best way to start here is, here's our documents that we love our documents here on Archive Hour. Here is a paper. This paper, as always, I'll put this on the screen, and of course in our Substack after the video comes out, we'll have all the good scans up there. Here is a paper. Okay, this paper is called Modulating Alternating Current Energy used to simulate audition in totally deaf humans, by Henry K. Puharich, MD, Joseph L. Lawrence, DDS. Presented at Aerospace Medical Association annual meeting, May 15th, 1964, Miami, Florida. Joseph L. Lawrence was Puharich's partner in inventing this device. In fact, he was a dentist who was part of the medical corps in the Army Chemical Center, I believe, where they were both stationed in the 50s. Puharich was a medical doctor. He was a dentist. When they left the service, they linked up and they started a company called Intellectron Corporation. I'm kind of all over the place here, but Intellectron Corporation is the company they started. And in fact, before I get into this paper, I'm going to give you an introduction on Intellectron Corporation because this is kind of where it all started. And this is sort of I guess like a brochure for Intellectron Corporation that I believe you can't find anywhere. This was in the archives. It's really interesting. But to explain what Intellectron Corporation was, it is history. In 1948, the principals of Intellectron Corporation examined two patients who had been committed to a psychiatric hospital because of a complaint that they were hearing sounds inaudible to others. Examinations show that each had carbonundrum deposits surrounding their metal dental fillings, and that the sounds they were hearing were broadcasts from a local radio station. Outgrowth of these findings led to the conclusion in 1955 that practical hearing rehabilitation could be achieved through as usual, these are all a little I can't read that word. I'm sorry. It looks like electrochemical, but it doesn't look right. Let's just say electrochemical stimulation of the teeth. In 1958, it was proved that speech discrimination rehabilitation could be achieved in patients with impaired hearing by transdermal This is just, it's hard to read because these are sort of blurred. I'm going to start again from the middle. Outgrowth of these findings led to the conclusion in 1955 that practical hearing rehabilitation could be achieved through electromechanical stimulation of the teeth. In 1958, it was proved that speech discrimination rehabilitation could be achieved in patients with impaired hearing by transdental electromechanical stimulation. In 1961, it was found that speech rehabilitation in the deaf could be improved by transdermal electrical stimulation. So, in short, that technology and that idea that they realized of this electromechanical stimulation of the teeth to help people who couldn't hear, that was sort of the beginning of research that stemmed out from that, and they started Intellectron Corporation to basically continue that research and that type of research with all sorts of weird medical devices, biomedical devices, etc. It's quite interesting. But that is the company they formed to do this type of research, Intellectron Corporation. Okay? And that started in 1961. Here's Puharich and here's Joseph Lawrence and their credentials here as far as their schooling, etc. So that's that. A little on Intellectron. Sorry to those two people who don't like that. So back to this paper, which I think is a good starting point to understanding the TD100 and all this stuff. Again, this is modulated alternating current energy used to simulate audition in totally deaf humans. Aerospace Medical Association annual meeting, May 15th, 1964, Miami, Florida. Something to point out here, and some conspiracy-minded people who want to go down a rabbit hole should look into this. There are stories that I've never confirmed, nor, to be honest, I've really looked into, that in the early 60s in Miami, Florida, in some sort of NASA aerospace world, there was a Star Kids program going on. Now, this, of course, was a decade before Puharich's group of space kids in the 1970s, but I'll try to find that and link it here. But I know for a fact that people have often talked about in the early 60s in Miami in some sort of aerospace or NASA facility, there was a Star Kids program going on that was essentially investigating psychic kids. So it's interesting that this stuff was going on in the same exact years in Miami, Florida at the Aerospace Medical Association. Is there something there? We don't know. So I'll read the abstract for you. An electronic system was devised wherein audio signals amplitude modulate a carrier signal, and the resulting electrical output is applied transdermally to the head by capacitive means. 10 patients with clinical total deafness, congenital or acquired, were studied who had in common an inability to discriminate words when stimulated at 82 dB by conventional acoustic amplifier means. Tests and controls are described as to the responses of these patients to pure tone and word electrical stimuli. So that is the abstract. Introduction. I'm not going to read all this. As usual, I will post this on Substack, but I just find it interesting to maybe get a better idea of how this whole thing worked. So this says, introduction. Electrical stimulation of hearing has been under study since 1800. The following quotation summarizes the potential usefulness of this art as known in 1962. All right, this is way too intense to read all this right now. I'm going to post this on Substack, and I'm going to try to find just a better summary of the TD100. Again, the whole point of Archive Hour, if you don't know already, is I'm kind of just blindly going through a lot of stuff that I have not really looked at in a long time. So it is kind of real time. It's in real time. All right. Okay, here we go. This might be better. Model TD100 description. General. The AMS model TD100 is a fully automatic clinical transdermal electrostimulation instrument designed to provide therapy for the improvement of speech discrimination in persons with sensory neural hearing loss. The unit represents the culmination and commercial implementation of experimental and clinical work in the field of electrostimulation by non-invasive technique. The instrument was designed and built to very strict quality requirements, and it has met all device safety regulations which were in effect or proposed at the time of its manufacture. All the units which were given to various research centers for evaluation in 1971 are still in use today and in fully satisfactory operating condition. B. Concept of operation. The principle of transdermal non-invasive electrostimulation is to obtain the highest possible electrostatic field across the tissues with the least power dissipation. This is accomplished by transmitting the electrical energy to the tissues in a series resonant mode in which the tissue itself forms one of the two series resonance elements, the capacitor. The other element, a fixed high Q inductor, is located in the instrument and is coupled to the tissue by means of metal discs. Since resonance occurs only at a single frequency, and the tissue changes its capacitive value under electrostimulation, the oscillator which supplies the energy must generate frequency which will maintain the resonant mode and thus must be a function of the tissue capacity. This requirement has been satisfied in the model TD100 by designing the oscillator in such a way that its frequency determining network is formed by the fixed inductor and the tissue capacity, and therefore whenever the capacity of the tissue changes, the frequency changes proportionally and the resonant mode is maintained at all times. System description. The model TD100 is basically an amplitude modulated generator whose carrier and modulation frequencies and output levels are pre-programmed to provide the required 7 therapy modes as described in model TD100 specifications. The instrument includes a variety of safety provisions such as a solenoid operated mode switch to provide positive correlation between type of electrodes, level, and signal types, transient suppression during mode changes, automatic signal shutoff above preset upper threshold levels, and dielectric fault detector. So this is obviously very complex scientific stuff here, which again, I'm not going to keep repeating myself. I am not scientifically minded in such a way where I can explain this. So I'm just reading it. And again, a big point of Archive Hour and what we're doing is for other people to comment and say, hey, I know about this, or hey, let me help you with that. So that's why I'm doing it. So this is a lot, and it's much, again, it's very scientific, but here's the picture of it. Something interesting to mention is, again, when we're reading all this, again, this is being written by somebody who many people wrote off as sort of a kook and a quack and et cetera. I mean, clearly you have to be pretty intelligent to invent something like this and sort of write like this. So my interest in this and why I want to put this out is because, this device, like I said, kind of went dark. And you would think that this would have been such a amazing medical invention that could really change people's lives, but it went dark. And a decade later, in the mid-'70s, Puharich is using it with certain people, allegedly enhancing their ability to channel and communicate with non-human intelligence, aka aliens. So that is something to think about. And that is why I find this sort of interesting. We'll get into that more. Okay, I'm not going to go there. So here is another interesting paper. This is titled Transdermal Electrostimulation Therapy, Recent History. And this is from 1974. This is actually not written by Puharich. It was written by James Martin and Paul Michael, Department of Psychology, Speech and Hearing Clinic, the Pennsylvania State University. So this is just, I guess, some information that was in this file that pertained to transdermal electrostimulation stuff. So that's a bit much. Let me see here. Okay, here's something interesting. So as you saw, the TD100 is a big box, right? Here are files no one's ever seen from the Intellectron Corporation. And what this is a ad or a sort of brochure for something called the TD200. And what is that? Intellectron transdermal therapy for sensorineural hearing loss or nerve deafness. Now, the TD200 is basically the TD100 and what it does, but shrunk down into a briefcase like this. So that big box that you see in the first video with Adam Curry, which is very heavy and very large, that is shrunken down into a basically a briefcase size device. So you can carry around this briefcase and travel with it and so forth. So I don't think anyone's ever seen this before. And here's an interesting picture of a guy wearing the headphones, as you see, using the TD200 on himself. Here it says description of the TD200. The TD200 instrument has been designed for the greatest possible ease and simplicity of operation. There are just 3 controls, see illustration, the on-off switch, the TD signal level control, and the timer. The headset plugs into color-coded jacks on the face of the instrument and stores in the instrument's case when not in use. Clear, simple operating instructions are permanently engraved on the face of the unit. The TD200 instrument is built into an attaché-styled case and may be taken with you when you travel. Special versions adapted for overseas voltages are available, as are overseas power source adapters for existing units. The TD200 instrument has been designed for the greatest possible ease and maintenance. You will only be required to replace the protective covering on one of the discs of the headset once a week. The procedure requires no tools and takes only a moment. A year's supply of Mylar discs is included with the unit, and more are available at nominal cost from Intellectron. Keep in mind, all this stuff, all that never came out, never happened, never released. You never see these anywhere. Why is that? Why is that is the question. And there's a lot to get into there. And it goes back to the idea of, if this thing works in such a way where a message that is contained in a certain frequency signal can be sent to somebody and they can hear it in their heads, that could have some interesting applications in other fields, I think. So, let me take a quick break here, and we're going to be right back. Stay tuned. All right, everybody, we're back. Sorry about that. Let me see here. Okay, we're back. Here is a very interesting document to continue about the TD100. And this, I believe you can find online, if I'm not mistaken. But this is an original copy, and this is a paper called "How Many Channels Have Been Allocated to the Brain?" Puharich, MD, Intellectron Corporation. Now, I'm just going to read the first paragraph here. It says, "That faculty or sum of faculties of the mind or soul by which one knows and reasons, usually excluding sensations, feelings, or imagination, is called the intellect. Thus, a science of the intellect or intelligence can be called intellectronics. The intellect is that power of the mind which can truly be called the creator of science. Science, as now known, is the resultant product of many intellects, analytic and synthetic models, and the error correlating feedback derived from experiment. We see the vast edifice of science as an objectification or projection of the labors of the intellect. This objectification of science is very much like watching the construction and growth of a large building whose architect is continually changing the plan. The result is that the edifice is ever changing, and no man knows what will be the final form, if indeed there will ever be a final form. But we are not so much interested today in the changing pattern of the evolving structure as we are in the architect, or indeed the vast corpse of architects who keep making the changes with perfection as an end goal. In fact, we are not so much interested in the personalities of the many architects as we are in that dynamism common to all of them, the nature of the intellect which senses the need for change and which directs the change." Interesting. So this paper I'm going to put on the Substack, of course, but he's talking a lot about the TD technology and a lot about how that correlates with psychic abilities, etc. How many channels have been allocated to the brain? Very interesting. We're going to put that up as well. It's a bit complex. So we have that paper. We had this, the TD200, which is the shrunken down TD100. We have this paper by the University of Pennsylvania. So I think what is interesting, to get back to Intellectron Corporation, is some of the other things that they invented at that time. We can put this up on the screen, but you see here it says the transdental system for individuals with either impaired or normal hearing. And this says Let me read it here. An intraoral radio receiver has been prototyped, which mounts in a saddle over normal teeth or can be inserted into the space left by two missing teeth as illustrated. This receiver utilizes a dynamic transducer for signal transmission. Thus, there is an element of bone conduction and electrical stimulation of hearing. So, you can see the diagram here. This is interesting because, as many people might know who have looked into this stuff, there is a theory that there's a lot of sketchy things going on in the sort of intelligence MK Ultra-ish world that had to do with this tooth implant, etc. I've heard stories. I have never seen conclusive proof of any of that, but I guess you could I guess it makes sense how that could be utilized for something in that realm of a spy situation, a mind control situation, etc. I'm sure there's tons of stuff out there about that. If you want to look into it, you can. So basically, this was really the main paper here, which breaks down the TD100. I am going to post this. So I think the best thing to do here is to go watch the original video with Adam Curry from a few weeks ago of trying to get the TD100 that we had access to working. And once you watch that, but maybe some of the stuff we just went through, which of course I will post on our Substack, maybe some of this information can help put the pieces together of what exactly this machine does and how it was used, and can it still be used and utilized today, I think is the biggest question. And of course, the other biggest question is, why did all of this just go dark? Why does this not exist today? Why did this not become a big medical invention that changed the world? It could have potentially. Why did that not happen? That is a good question and can be explored. And I have my own theories, which I will get into now before we end this. And that is basically, as we see in these documents, this was invented in the early 1960s, 61. Clearly it worked. There's other documentation that I don't have here, but there were members of certain medical organizations that showed up to Intellectron who tested this thing themselves. They tested it on obviously real deaf patients, and they proved beyond reasonable doubt that it worked the way that Puharich and his partner said it worked. And what is also a fact is that, like I keep saying, this technology and this TD100 invention basically just vanished. No one really ever talked about it again after the early 60s. It just kind of went away. But you see it pop up here and there throughout Puharich's life. You see it in pictures, you see it in videos. So it was clearly around, it was clearly there. And my big point in all of this is that in the mid-1970s, when Puharich was working with the space kids, who were, of course, teenage psychic test subjects, alleged psychic test subjects, he was working with them, and he was also working with other psychics, older people, particularly a woman named Phyllis Schlemmer, who he was involved with, working with in that period, the mid-1970s. And there are multiple accounts of the space kids, some of them, and of Phyllis Schlemmer, openly admitting and talking about the fact that this TD100 device was being used on them in trance channeling sessions. So the trance channeling sessions were, of course, these sessions Puharich would have with him and various psychics in the Faraday cage where they would go into trance. The space kids or the psychic would go into trance. Puharich would not be in a trance. He would be monitoring it and tape recording it. And these individuals would go into a trance and all of a sudden begin to channel information, whether it was from the Nine, which were, a group of alleged intelligences out somewhere in the universe, or whether it was other non-human entities. They would channel information. Puharich would ask questions, they would respond. They spoke about all sorts of weird sci-fi type stuff. Hundreds of hours of these recordings. And all the while, the TD100 is being used on these individuals during these sessions. So my biggest question and my biggest thought in all of this is, why did this device go dark in the early 60s and all of a sudden resurface over a decade later? And why was it being used in very strange, very sci-fi-esque channeling sessions with psychic subjects? What did that do? What did it do? We don't know. I certainly don't know. All I know is the facts that it was happening, it was being used, and that's about it. So that is why I find this all very interesting, and that is why we do Archive Hour, because we want to present this information, and I want to say, hey, I don't really know how this works. I don't really get it. Maybe you do, and maybe we can start the conversation, and it's fun just to speculate and talk about it and maybe get to some sort of conclusion. So that being said, I don't want to read all this stuff. Like I said earlier, I'm just going to post it because it's really too complex to read it all. But this is the TD100. Hopefully it's a little better understanding of what it is and what it does. Again, go back and watch the Adam Curry video, which I will link here, but it's also on our channel. That gives some context as to what it is as well. And this is, I think, hopefully launching a bigger investigation and looking in more deeply to this topic, the TD100, what it is, why it kind of disappeared off the face of the earth, and why it was being used to essentially facilitate communication with alleged non-human intelligence. Was it real, or was it all make-believe and fake? We don't know, but we'd like to find out. Anyways, please subscribe to our YouTube. Please subscribe to our Substack. We really appreciate it. It helps everything I'm doing here. And again, appreciate you watching. I guess this wasn't really that long of an episode. But what are you going to do? It's Friday. We want to go enjoy the weekend, etc. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. We'll see you next week. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.